The Galactic Dominion had never failed. For 10,000 years, they had expanded across the stars, crushing rebellions, assimilating lesser species, and erasing civilizations that dared to resist. Their greatest weapon, the Void Annihilator, could reduce entire planets to drifting atoms, leaving no trace of life behind. No shield had withstood it, no species had survived it. Yet now, Supreme Overlord Zeraphis stood before the observation window of his dreadnought, staring at the impossible. The human vessel still existed. It was a single, obsolete warship, nothing compared to the Dominion's armada. And yet, the Void Annihilator had fired directly upon it. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And the ship had not been erased. It remained, its battle-scarred hull drifting through the void, systems flickering but undeniably intact. "Impossible," muttered one of the Dominion's high scientists, his tendrils quivering with unease. "That ship should be nothing but quantum ash. The annihilation field functions on every known molecular structure." Supreme Overlord Zeraphis did not reply. His cold reptilian eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the human vessel. Its design was crude, lacking the organic elegance of Dominion warships. It had been patched together, reinforced with materials the Dominion had long deemed obsolete, yet somehow it had endured the unendurable. Inside the human ship, Captain Elias Rourke exhaled sharply, gripping the edges of his command console. The entire bridge smelled of ozone and burnt wiring. Alarms blared. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, sealing hull breaches, rerouting power, and extinguishing small fires. "Status?" Rourke demanded. "Shields are down. Hull integrity at 47%, Lieutenant Vega replied, wiping blood from her brow. "But we're still here," Rourke smirked. "Damn right, we are." Outside, the Dominion fleet hesitated. For the first time in recorded history, their ultimate weapon had failed. The predator species that had ruled the stars with absolute dominance had just encountered something that defied all logic. The Dominion had come to destroy humanity. Now, for the first time, they wondered if humanity was about to destroy them. Supreme Overlord Zeraphis turned away from the observation window, his taloned fingers tightening behind his back. The command deck of the Dominion's warship Eternal Judgment was silent, an eerie, suffocating silence that had never existed before. The Void Annihilator had failed. Such a thing was unthinkable. The Dominion was a civilization of conquerors, an empire that had crushed thousands of species under its rule. Resistance was not tolerated. Defiance was a death sentence. Yet here, drifting in the void, was one lone human warship that refused to die. Zeraphis turned toward his high scientists, his voice cold as the abyss. "Explain." The gathered aliens hesitated. Some of their bioluminescent skin dimmed in unease, others flicked their tendrils in panicked contemplation. Finally, Chief Researcher Vazul stepped forward. "Supreme Overlord, we do not know." His voice trembled. "The Void Annihilator has functioned flawlessly against every known molecular structure in the galaxy. It reduces matter to its most basic quantum components. But that ship," he gestured toward the flickering image of the human vessel, "has resisted, not just once, but multiple times." Zeraphis exhaled slowly, his mind calculating the implications. The Dominion had never encountered a technology beyond their understanding. They had ruled the stars for millennia, their advancements so far beyond those of other species that war had become a formality, an execution rather than a battle. And yet, the humans, their ships were crude. Their technology was inefficient, redundant, built with fail-safes upon fail-safes rather than the streamlined perfection of Dominion engineering. And somehow, that redundancy had saved them. Zeraphis gestured toward the holoscreen, enlarging the damaged human ship. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. A Dominion officer hesitated. "My lord, should we not simply fire again? Perhaps the Annihilator requires—" Zeraphis silenced him with a glare. "We do not attack what we do not understand," he said, his voice sharp. "We study, we analyze, and then we destroy." The order was given. Inside the battered warship USV Indomitable, Captain Elias Rourke exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he listened to the damage reports flooding in. Shield generators are fried. Port thrusters at 20%. "We've lost half our weapons, and yet they were still here." Rourke ran a hand through his sweat-drenched hair, looking at the flickering tactical display. The Dominion fleet hovered around them like a pack of wolves, circling but not attacking. That was new. "They're hesitating," murmured Lieutenant Vega, the ship's weapons officer. She leaned over the console, scanning the alien fleet. "They don't understand how we're still alive," Rourke chuckled, shaking his head. "Good, let's keep it that way." A sudden chime interrupted them, an incoming transmission from the Dominion flagship. Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Huh, never thought they'd actually want to talk." Vega's expression hardened. "It's probably a demand for surrender." Rourke smiled grimly. "Then they clearly don't know us very well." With a flick of his fingers, he opened the channel. A towering alien figure appeared on the holoscreen, reptilian features illuminated by the cold glow of the Dominion warships. "Bridge. Supreme Overlord Zeraphis. I am Captain Elias Rourke of the United Systems Navy," Rourke said evenly. "I assume you called to congratulate us on surviving your little doomsday weapon?" Zeraphis studied him, unblinking. Then, with a voice as sharp as a blade, he asked, "How?" Rourke leaned back, crossing his arms. "Wouldn't you like to know?" For a brief moment neither spoke. Then Zeraphis did something unexpected. He smiled. The moment stretched between them. The Dominion Overlord's reptilian gaze locked onto Rourke's own. The silence wasn't tense, it was calculating. Zeraphis was not merely a warlord. He was a strategist, a ruler of countless conquered species, and in that moment he was trying to determine whether humanity was an anomaly or a threat. Finally he spoke. "You amuse me, human." His voice was smooth, controlled, but beneath it was something else, something even his subordinates noticed. Unease, Rourke smirked. "I tend to have that effect on people." Zeraphis ignored the quip. "You will surrender your vessel. You have no shields, no reinforcements. You are nothing but an ember in the void, flickering before it is extinguished." Rourke leaned forward. "And yet, here we are. Still burning." For the first time in millennia, Zeraphis was faced with something unknown. The Void Annihilator had erased entire civilizations, reduced planetary defenses to dust, shattered moons. But this single human warship had survived. It made no sense, and Zeraphis hated things that made no sense. He turned to Vazul, the chief researcher. "Why does this ship still exist?" Vazul hesitated. "We have examined the ship's construction, Supreme Overlord. It is inefficient. Their armor is outdated. Their hull is composed of metals our engineers discarded centuries ago. Their shielding technology is primitive." Zeraphis's gaze darkened. "And yet," Vazul swallowed, "and yet, the redundancies in their systems appear to have rendered the Annihilator ineffective. Every time a section of the ship was erased, backup systems compensated. Hull plating rerouted structural integrity. Power grids rebalanced before full collapse. Their technology is not advanced, but it is layered, reinforced against total failure." Zeraphis' claws clicked against the command console. "A species too stupid to build efficient ships, but too stubborn to die." He exhaled slowly, then turned back to the holoscreen. "No more games." His voice was sharp as a blade. "If we cannot erase your ship, then we will break it." The command was given. The Dominion fleet attacked. "Multiple hostiles inbound!" Vega shouted. "They're coming in hard!" The USV Indomitable trembled as Dominion fighters descended. Upon it in perfect formation, streams of plasma fire erupted across the void, splashing against the ship's fractured hull. "Evasive maneuvers," Rourke barked. "Redirect all remaining power to propulsion. We need to stay mobile." The ship lurched as thrusters flared to life. The Indomitable moved like a wounded predator, weaving between the incoming attacks. Despite its damage, it was still fighting. Vega gritted her teeth. Returning fire! The Indomitable's railguns and missile pods roared to life, spewing molten devastation toward the Dominion fighters. Several alien ships erupted into fireballs, but more replaced them. The Dominion didn't just have numbers. They had precision, and they were adapting. "They're predicting our movements," Vega cursed. "Their fighters are adjusting formation, cutting off our escape routes." Rourke's mind raced. The Void Annihilator had failed against them. But this was a conventional battle where numbers and strategy won, and humanity, for all its defiance, was outnumbered. Unless, his eyes flickered to the star map, unless they weren't fighting conventionally, a slow grin spread across Rourke's face. "Vega," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. "I want a full burn toward that debris field." Vega blinked. "The one full of old Dominion wreckage. That thing's a graveyard." "Exactly," Rourke said, "and I'm about to haunt it." The Indomitable shot toward the massive debris field, a twisted graveyard of ruined ships from previous Dominion conquests. The Dominion fighters hesitated. No sane commander would fly into that mess. The wreckage was dense, a maze of jagged metal and uncharted dangers. But humans thrived in places they weren't supposed to survive. As the Indomitable weaved through the wreckage, Dominion pilots pursued, but their perfect formations began to break. They weren't used to improvising. They were used to order. And order was death in a battlefield of chaos. Rourke grinned. "Vega, activate the maglocks." With a hiss, the Indomitable latched onto a massive hunk of Dominion wreckage, going dark. Power signatures dropped, mimicking the lifeless ruins around them. To the Dominion scanners, the human ship had simply vanished. Where did they go? A Dominion officer shouted on Xyrophys's command deck. The Supreme Overlord's eyes narrowed. He knew. This was a trap, but his forces didn't. The Dominion fighters spread out, searching, only to be ambushed. From the shadows of the wreckage, the Indomitable struck. Railguns thundered. Missiles erupted from beneath ruined ships. The Dominion forces, disoriented and fragmented, were torn apart one by one. Xyrophys watched in stunned silence. The humans had lured them in, and they were winning. But he was not defeated yet. "Enough," he growled. "Bring the dreadnoughts forward, crush them." The final battle was about to begin. The Eternal Judgment, flagship of the Dominion, surged forward through the wreckage field, its immense form blotting out the stars. Behind it, two other dreadnoughts followed, their plasma cannons glowing with barely contained energy. The ambush had cost the Dominion valuable ships, but the Supreme Overlord had grown tired of this human defiance. This was no longer a battle. It was an execution. Xyrophys stood tall on his command deck, his gaze fixed on the wreckage where the Indomitable had last been seen. "Bring all weapons to bear," he ordered. "End them." Aboard the Indomitable, Rourke watched the dreadnoughts advance on his flickering holoscreen. The Dominion fighters had been thrown into disarray, but the real fight had only just begun. "These things could level an entire planet," Vega whispered. "What the hell do we do against that?" Rourke exhaled. His fingers hovered over the controls. They had one shot. "We do what humans do best," he said. "We make them regret underestimating us." He turned to his crew. "Engineering how? Much power do we have left?" "Not enough for sustained fire," came the reply. "We're running on fumes, Captain." Rourke's eyes flicked to the debris around them, wrecked Dominion ships, old war husks floating in the void. Then an idea struck him. A crazy, reckless, absolutely human idea. "Then we're not using our weapons," he murmured. Vega frowned. "Sir," Rourke grinned, "if the Void Annihilator can't destroy us, let's see what happens when we throw it back in their faces." The plan Rourke activated the ship-wide comms. "Listen up, everyone. We don't have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with those dreadnoughts, but we don't need to. The Dominion is obsessed with efficiency. Their ships don't have redundancies like ours. We're going to use that against them." He pointed at the wreckage around them. "We're jury-rigging those Dominion warheads to create the biggest detonation this battlefield has ever seen. We're turning their own ships into a damn minefield." The crew sprang into action. Engineers moved quickly, using the Indomitable's last reserves of power to send out drones, attaching explosives to the drifting remains of old Dominion warships. They worked fast, because they had to. The dreadnoughts were closing in, the eternal judgment. "Locked onto the Indomitable. They're exposed," a Dominion officer said. "Shall we fire?" Zeraphis hesitated. Something was wrong. The humans weren't running, they were waiting. Then it happened. As soon as the first dreadnought entered the wreckage field, Rourke issued a single command: detonate. The battlefield exploded. Waves of fire erupted as old Dominion warheads detonated in synchronized blasts, ripping through the unsuspecting dreadnoughts. The eternal judgment shuddered violently as debris slammed into its hull. The second dreadnought was engulfed in flame, its shields overloading in seconds. Inside, the Dominion command deck, alarms blared. Zeraphis clutched his control panel as his ship shook under the force of its own empire's weapons. "What have they done?" a stunned officer gasped. "They've turned our own wreckage into a weapon," Vazul whispered, his bioluminescent skin pulsed with fear. "They should not have survived," Zeraphis roared, "but they had, and now the eternal judgment was drifting, systems failing. The humans had done the impossible. They had forced the Dominion's flagship into a position it had never been in before. Vulnerable, the Indomitable powered up, thrusters burning as it shot toward the wounded eternal judgment. Rourke's voice came through the open comm channel, clear and calm. "Supreme Overlord Zeraphis," he said, "you can order your fleet to stand down, or I can show you what happens when humans really get desperate." Zeraphis stood in stunned silence. For the first time in Dominion history, an enemy had survived their ultimate weapon, turned their own battlefield against them, and cornered their leader. For the first time, Zeraphis saw what humanity truly was. Not the weak species the Dominion had dismissed, not the primitive creatures they had planned to erase. They were survivors, and survivors didn't stop fighting until they had nothing left. Zeraphis exhaled slowly. He had two choices: continue the fight and risk losing everything, or accept the inevitable. For the first time in his life, Supreme Overlord Zeraphis surrendered, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The eternal judgment powered down. Its weapons, the Dominion fleet, once an unstoppable force of conquest, drifted silently in the void. The battle was over. Aboard the Indomitable, a tense silence filled the bridge as the crew processed what had just happened. They had done the impossible, not just survived, but forced the most feared empire in the galaxy to surrender. Vega exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Did we just win?" Rourke stared at the flickering tactical display. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I think we did." Cheers erupted across the ship. Some laughed, others slumped in exhaustion, but all of them knew this was history. On the command deck of the Eternal Judgment, Supreme Overlord Zeraphis watched the chaos unfold. He had spent centuries breaking civilizations, watching species beg for mercy before being erased. Now, for the first time, it was his fleet surrendering. The humans should not have won. They should have been wiped from existence the moment the Void Annihilator fired. Yet they had endured, survived, adapted, and now, even in victory, they did something that truly unsettled him. They did not execute him. Rourke's voice came through. "The comms. We could finish this right now, Overlord, but we're not like you." Zeraphis remained silent. "We're not conquerors. We're not tyrants. We don't erase species because we can," Rourke continued. "But if you ever come for us again, you won't just lose this battle." His voice was steel. "You'll lose everything." The warning settled over the Dominion fleet like a shadow. Zeraphis exhaled slowly. He had underestimated them. Everyone had. The humans were not the most advanced. They were not the strongest, but they were something far worse. They were unbreakable. News of the battle spread faster than light. Across the Dominion, whispers turned to fear. Other species who had once trembled under the Overlord's rule now looked toward humanity with hope. The war had not ended that day, but the Dominion had been shaken. For the first time in 10,000 years, they had been forced to surrender. For the first time, they feared something greater than their own power. And at the center of it all, the lone, battle-scarred human warship drifted through space, a symbol of defiance, of resilience, of the species that refused to die. The indomitable. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage.